Good morning, good morning, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Power of Attorney with LaTanya Moore. Now, you know, guys, I have been talking to you at least this week about some legal tips because you guys were so gracious enough to send me in all of your legal questions and all the things that you wanted me to cover as part of Power of Attorney. And again, thank you guys so much for joining me live. Thank you guys so much for tuning in every Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. Central Standard Time to Power of Attorney. So listen, go ahead, like, share, and comment because we are talking about a very important topic today, and that is what happens to debt when we pass. Okay? Very important, guys. Very, 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 very important because I think that sometimes we get misinformation when we're looking at things like this. There are lots of people that, you know, I like to call it the street committee. You know, oftentimes the street committee knows things and or they think that they know things that they actually do not know. And they give out a lot of misinformation. And so what happens when they give out this misinformation, guys, is that you end up thinking one thing and it's actually something else. So I, again, want to thank you guys for sending. I'm just getting set up here. I want to thank you guys for just sending in your questions, and you guys have been absolutely awesome. So again, please like, share, and comment. This is very vital that you get this, and again, that you share it with others. So we are now, again, I'm just getting set up. I'm just sharing this, guys, because you know what? This is such an interesting topic. I want to make sure that everybody that needs to know about this knows that we are doing this live. I am taking questions. This is interactive. I'm just making sure, like I said, to just add a couple of people to our live broadcast that I know, and I want to make sure I reach out to the 2 or 3 people that sent in this question, because I've had lots of questions about different things. And all of these kind of go in line with what we're talking about today. So for those of you that were with us yesterday, you know, we talked about things like a will. We talked about powers of attorney. And I want to encourage you to actually go back and watch that. We're not going to spend really any time on that today because I want to make sure that I'm available to ask and answer your questions about this particular topic today. So again, just want to make sure that we are sending this out to people that I know really need this information. So again, good morning. Welcome to Power of Attorney with LaTanya Moore. Today, we are talking about what happens to debt when we pass. And so for those of you that may not know, there is actually a process. Again, this is our follow-up to when we talked about wills. And lots of people don't realize that sometimes when we pass away, you know, we have to pay those debts. And well, let me say this. You don't have to pay it, but your estate will have to pay it. So the reason that I wanted to bring that up is because, again, this is our follow-up. This is our follow-up to wills. So I want to say this one thing. When you go and you acquire a debt, of course, you're signing a contract, and a promissory note, guys, is a contract. So you are signing a contract to repay this debt. One thing that the average person never does, you never, ever, ever read the fine print, right? Most people don't take the time to actually read the fine print. And the reason that I am bringing that up is because it is vital that you get used to reading the fine print. You guys know that oftentimes what do I always say? Check behind people, right? When you're dealing with anybody, I always say, make sure that you check behind, make sure that you read, right? And make sure that you know exactly what you're agreeing to. Because I guarantee you, for those of you that have any paperwork for a loan that you have acquired, definitely in the last few years, and when I say last few years, the last probably 15 to 20 years, I'm telling you, that particular loan actually says if something happens to you, right? In essence, of course, it's in legalese language, but in essence, what it's saying is your heirs, see, heirs and assigns, when you see those sorts of wordings, that actually means the people that are here, that's your family, that's your friends, that's the executor of your estate. If you have a will, those folks are responsible for paying certain debts. So you want to make sure that you know that, guys. And that's why I'm encouraging you, for those of you that have loans or anything that's going to require you to make payments, you need to understand that you need to read that fine print. You need to ask questions. You need to understand that what's going to happen after you pass away. And again, this is really akin to what we talked about yesterday, because your family and your spouse, your family, your heirs could very well be responsible for debt when you pass away. So, you know, guys, I got to make sure that I have my notes, because I want to make sure I'm giving you guys excellent information. The big thing about this and why it's important is because this really can eat up your assets. For those of you that have assets already, you know, if you have a home, if you have a business, if you have certain things, you know, with your bank account or anything like that, you already know that this is something that is property, is real estate. If you have any type of intellectual property, for those of you that are in entertainment, for example, you may have some royalties that are coming in. That's property as well. For those of you that own trademarks, copyrights, any type of licensing rights and things of that nature, all of these things, that's considered property. Again, your bank accounts, all of this is considered property. Mutual funds, any type of securities, stocks that you guys may have. And the reason, again, that this is important is because when you have all these debts that your heirs actually owe, that's going to eat into those assets. And so oftentimes people don't know that what actually is happening is that you are now, you know, you think that you're leaving something to a family member or you know, to your children, to your spouse, when now they're going to have to turn around and they're going to have to actually pay out that money to a creditor. Very important. Remember, I told you guys yesterday, this is why I always encourage you guys to read, right? To research. Don't just get so caught up in whatever this is that you need and you're not paying attention to the next steps. We're not going to talk a lot today about life insurance. That actually is going to be another subject for another day. All I can say is I don't want to see another GoFundMe for a funeral. But one thing I will mention in this context about life insurance is that when you're choosing how much life insurance to get, you have to think about everything that you owe. You have to think about all of your debts, because most people say, well, I just need enough to bury me. That is not true. If you have any type of debt, if you have student loan debt, credit card debt, if you have a mortgage, all of that, you need to make sure, guys, that you have enough insurance to cover those debts, number one. Number two, for those of you that want to utilize your insurance to leave something for your children or grandchildren or your spouse, you need to make sure you have that in addition to what you have now. Very vital that you get this, because again, oftentimes we don't think about that. You know, people will say, well, I mean, I don't know anything, but then they have a mortgage or they have a car payment or they have credit card debt, and they automatically believe, erroneously, unfortunately, they oftentimes believe that, well, if something happens to me, then I don't have to, you know, nobody's going to have to worry about paying that debt. So here are just a few that I want to make sure that I share with you, because again, your debts become the responsibility of your estate after you die, which means the estate is open when either if you have a will, if your will goes to probate, or if you do not have a will and in your state, someone steps up to take responsibility and they open an estate. There are a number of reasons why people would open an estate if a person does not have a will. A number of reasons why you would do that. It's really not pertinent to this conversation, but just know that sometimes people will do that. We talked yesterday about some things that you could do to, you know, move some stuff around and all of that. And so I want to, again, just refer you back to that video, which is a little bit outside of what we're talking about today. just know, again, any debts that you leave behind really can eat up your assets. It can eat up your life insurance proceeds for those of you that have life insurance. And here's the thing, you need to make sure that you have at least one life insurance policy that your executor or the person that's going to be responsible for paying your bills, you want to make sure that there's a life insurance policy that is available for that person to do that with. So for example, let's say that you're a married person and so you leave your sister or brother as executor of your estate, but all of your life insurance is all of your life insurance beneficiaries are your spouse and your children. Well, guess what? As the executor of your estate, your sister or brother will be the one responsible for paying those bills because it's actually the estate that owes the bills. Now, that's a general statement that may not apply to every single situation, but just know these are the things that you need to think about. It is not your insurance agent's responsibility to necessarily tell you these things, because again, the questions that they ask you is really about what do you have, you know, and things like that, because they learn certain things that they need to be able to tell you to make sure that you have enough insurance coverage, but they can't suggest who a beneficiary could be. They really cannot make those suggestions. That is really up to you, which is why I wanted to make sure that I shared this type of information with you guys for you to think about that. For those of you that have existing policies, think about what I'm saying. You may want to make some type of beneficiary changes. Not to say you have to turn the whole policy over to someone, but you may want to set out, 10 or 15% again to the person that's the executor of your estate. Because guess what? It is not always the spouse that is the executor of the estate. It is not always the children that is the executor of the estate. Oftentimes, guess what? A lot of people leave their attorneys, some people leave their CPAs as executor of their estate, because the executor's responsibility is to make sure that all of your bills are paid and all of your interests are taken care of. So it doesn't even necessarily have to be a beneficiary, but you want to make sure that there are pools and pockets of money. Because the other thing too is if you don't do some of the things that we talked about on yesterday, the executor possibly has the opportunity or the authority to sell your assets to pay the debts of the estate. So again, this is why a lot of these things that I'm talking about, these debts, it's very important that you account for these things in things like life insurance. There are also there's credit insurance, for example, that you can take out where if something happens to you before this is paid off, mortgage insurance, all of those types of smaller insurance policies, that what happens is the face value of the policy decreases over the term. It's called a decreasing term policy. So what happens is, once you pay that off, everything is fine, it's free and clear. But while you're paying it, if something happens to you, that insurance policy kicks off and pays off that debt. Great insurance to have. For those of you that feel like, again, this is a value statement. You have to make your own value statement to determine whether or not this is something that is really useful for you. So again, these are all some great tools and tips and pointers for you to think about so that you can properly plan as you're moving forward. Because again, your estate is everything you owned at the time of your death. So remember yesterday we talked about being able to add people to deeds and titles and things of that nature so that you can make sure that certain things don't have to go through a probate so that you could, I don't want to say escape, but you know what I'm saying. You want to make sure that you limit your estate tax liability. Now, again, the executive of your estate is the person that's responsible for dealing with your will and estate after death. And they're going to use those assets to pay off your particular debts. That could be writing checks from a particular bank account, like I said, selling property. And if there isn't enough to cover your debts, sometimes certain creditors may be out of luck. Now, let me put a little caveat here. I have to talk in general terms, guys, because different state laws are different. So I'm encouraging you, before you go make a whole estate plan based on what you've seen here on Power of Attorney, I need for you to contact a local estate attorney so that, you know, or estate planning attorney so that you can have this conversation. But have these types of conversations with the people that are knowledgeable about your state law. So I want to make sure that I put that out there. Somebody said, I got two different things going on, but someone says, when I die, all bets are off. I do not want nobody to get paid. Too late. Well, Charles, you may not have a choice. I'm sorry. So let's look at certain things. A mortgage. Here's certain things that people may not know about a mortgage. Well, let me say this. So, okay, let's look at the mortgage. Somebody's going to be responsible for paying it. Like if it's a joint home owner or if someone's inherits the house, you don't just get the house free and clear when there's a mortgage on it, because remember, the mortgage company is technically still the owner until you pay that debt off. Right now, in some places they can't immediately call the note in because the main mortgagor or mortgagee died. Like usually, like, there's some laws in place to protect a person that's inheriting property, so they can't immediately come in after your death and like foreclose on your co-owner. That you just can't do that. Now, if there's no joint home owner, right, the executor can pay off the mortgage after the estate. I mean, out of the estate, the executor can do that because again, these are assets that you owned at the time of your death. So remember, that is very vital. Remember, for those of you that didn't see yesterday's, we talked about some of those things. Remember, I was telling you about the importance of making sure that you have someone else on that deed with you to your real estate and the reasons for that. Okay, we talked about that yesterday, so I encourage you to go back and look at that. Now, here's one thing that people don't know. If there is a mortgage on the home and there is, let's say it's just you, there's a mortgage on the home, or whether, let's say it's a co-owner, but that co-owner, but that primary person that was paying the mortgage is the person who made the payment, for example. Let's just use that as a small example. What a lot of people don't know is that because this happened in a death, you do not have to qualify credit-wise to assume that debt. A person does not have to do that, but you must show an ability to pay. So a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people just think like, man, well, I can't qualify for a loan because I don't have good credit or something of that nature. Before you do that, when it's a death, now there's not every situation, but when there is a death in play, you do not have to qualify for that mortgage in the sense of credit. You don't have to go through that whole process. You can assume that particular mortgage. Now, of course, there are several caveats. I don't have time to go through all of them, but just know in general, that is possible. Okay? Because again, you're talking about a mortgage. Home equity loan, you still have to pay it. It is very, very similar. Very, very similar to the home mortgage, except a lender can actually force the person that's inheriting the property to repay the home equity loan. That's a little bit different. Oftentimes, they want their money. They understand that, Grandpa Willie may have passed away, but they still want their money because there's a home equity loan. Now, that could require a forced sale of the property. Again, you want to try to assume that mortgage if you can. You want to try to refinance that home. There are a number of things that you can try to do to make sure that you are in a really good situation, guys. But again, there are some things that you just need to know. Again, read the fine print. Whenever you're going after anything like that, make sure, because I'm telling you, they're going to say, why would anyone loan you money without having some type of way to collect if something happens to you or you check out before that money is paid? So again, but you want to make sure that and like I said at the top of the hour, you want to make sure that you have the proper planning, the proper system in place to account for that. Very important. Credit cards. I've had several people, even we had somebody today that said, too bad, too sad, I'm gone, like nobody's getting paid. But with credit cards, maybe. you know, there may be a requirement. Again, you must know that. Now, that's something that's called a subordinate lien holder, for example. And what that means is you at the bottom of the barrel in terms of getting money. So oftentimes, if the estate runs out of money, for example, the credit card creditors pretty much are going to be out of luck. Okay. And the reason that they're going to be out of luck is because credit card debt is unsecured debt. Anytime that there is secured debt, there is always an opportunity to recoup the money because they take an interest in that particular property, meaning the property can be sold and they can recoup some of their money. Right? Now, if there is a joint account holder, that person may still be responsible for any of the unpaid credit card balances. Now, being an authorized user and a joint account holder, two different things. Authorized users, not responsible, generally not responsible. Now, this is kind of different when it comes down to spouses and community property estates and all this sort of stuff, which is why I'm encouraging you, again, if this is something that is a concern for you, you need to make sure that you reach out to the proper legal person in your area, within your state, that does this particular thing. So very important. Same thing with car loan, maybe, because again, remember we talked about that is a secured debt. And so the estate, the executor can certainly pay it off as part of the estate. But if the payments stop, the lender can turn around and repossess the car, right? So if the plan is to keep this asset, there needs to be a way to continue to make the payments. And that's very similar to when I talked about the mortgage, where if someone steps up, so let's say, you know, Grandpa Willie passes away. And so, you know, the granddaughter says, well, I'll take over payments for Grandpa Willie's car. You know, I want the car, whatever. Grandpa Willie leaves it to her. So she gets the car. She works it out with the lender. She then assumes that what's left of the car loan, now everything's transferred, title's transferred, all of that is transferred to her. And she just simply has to continue to make the payments. And so therefore there will be no action taken. The reason I'm saying it that way is because that is literally what has to happen. Now, oftentimes, if you let them know that, you know, that you're working out what's going on, this person's passed away, they will work with you. Don't ignore the people's calls and just say, well, Grandpa Willie passed away and we're not paying for the car. Not if you want to keep it. Now, if you don't want to keep it, just call the people and tell them to come pick it up, you know, and come get it. Because again, Grandpa Willie's gone. So these are things, guys, that I think you really need to think about. You need to really, really think about that. Now, the biggie. These were most of the questions that you guys sent to me. I just kind of lumped everything together for purposes of today's discussion. Student loans. Oh. For those of us that are still paying student loans 20 years later. So student loans, seriously, maybe. You may be responsible, your estate may be responsible for paying the student loans. Now, the estate should pay off private student loan debt, but if they don't, private student loan debt, let me make sure I stress that, private student loan debt. But the lenders really have no recourse if the estate doesn't have the assets to repay. Remember, we talked about unsecured obligations, unsecured debt, right? It is an unsecured debt. However, if you have something like a Parent Plus loan, or if you have a cosigner for a private student loan, right? That cosigner for the private student loan will continue to be responsible for the remaining debt. So if mom or dad cosigns on a private student loan and you pass away, mom or dad are still responsible as the co-borrower for that student loan. Now, again, when we're talking about community property estates, right? It's always hinky, guys. It's always hinky in community property estates. But in general, if the debt was incurred during the marriage in a community property estate, right? that means that the spouse will be responsible for the student loan debt. And please excuse us, guys. Our landscaper is right outside of the door. But again, community property states are different. This is why it is very important for those of you that have seen something today that piques your interest. Reach out to an attorney in your state that handles these things so they can explain to you exactly what you need to do and what obligations there are going to be if this happens. Okay, now, some lenders will actually forgive your student loan debt upon death. So we're talking about private lenders. Some private lenders will forgive these debts of a deceased person. So remember what I was saying. Reach out, talk to the people, let them know the situation. Now, this is, again, just your debt. We're not talking about co-borrowers, but you can still try to work it with that too. You just never know. You never know what can happen. That's why you have to communicate, right? Now, federal student loans are discharged upon your death, right? So for those of you that still have your loans with, I don't know, Department of Education, or I don't know who's doing it now, but you get the picture. Those are typically discharged upon your death. Oftentimes people will, they will combine, consolidate. So just double check, make sure that you haven't gone from public to private, or just know your status. Now, again, if the student's parent has a Parent Plus loan, remember I talked about the Parent Plus loan, it will be discharged upon the death of either the student or the parent. So if either party passes away, right? When it's a Parent Plus loan situation, if either party passes away, then the debt is typically discharged. You must communicate, right? You must communicate. Don't just say, well, I don't know what's going on. And guess what? Don't just continue to pay if you don't have to. So these are some of the top things. These are some of the top things that people were asking me to cover. And so I wanted to, again, I know we just kind of breezed through everything, but I just wanted to make sure that you guys have some general information so that you can do your due diligence to make sure that you are protected. And so, again, the circumstances where others are typically responsible, if you co-sign on a loan, right? If something happens to the main person, as the co-signer, you're typically important. Anybody that's a joint account holder, we talked about that earlier, typically you're going to still be on the hook. If you live in a community property state, typically you may be responsible for those debts, but it is typically the debts that are incurred during the marriage, not that predate the marriage, but during the marriage. So for those of you that got married and then your spouse decided that they were going to go to school and they get student loan debt during the marriage, as a spouse, you may be responsible if that person passes away. So there are lots of community property states. The ones that I kind of know off my head are like Arizona, Idaho, California, Louisiana, Nevada, I think Texas, maybe New Mexico, and there are a couple others, maybe Wisconsin. There's a few community property states. The first thing that I would suggest that you do is to find out if you live in a community property state. I'm in Alabama, not a community property state. I've lived in Florida, not a community property state. Lived in Jersey, not a community property state. Lived in Georgia, not a community property state. So again, those I know because I've lived actually in those states. And so I know that those are not community property states. But again, I want to thank you guys for joining live. Those of you that are watching on the replay, please leave your comments in the comment section. Please continue to inbox me, or actually, if you want to, you can leave it right in the comments, some things that you would like for me to cover in Power of Attorney. It has been such a pleasure being with you every Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. Central Standard Time. And so for those of you that want to find out more about me and what I do, you can go to www.latanyamore.com. That's www.latanyamore.com. And so listen, I want everyone to take some time and sit down and make sure, I want you to check your life insurance policies against your debt and against what your goals are if something were to happen to you in the immediate future, and ask yourself, do I have enough to cover everything that needs to be covered? I want you to research and find out what debts your family would have to be responsible for and which ones they wouldn't have to be responsible for, and make sure, guys, that you are covered. Let's stop this having to do a GoFundMe when someone passes away, because oftentimes you don't raise enough money to cover their debts. Cover their funeral, let alone their debts. So again, let's think about that. One last thing before we leave for today. For those of you that have children, please have life insurance on your children. I know. I've had people tell me, well, I just feel like, that just doesn't make sense. Well, it makes sense if your child passes away, because now you have to bury that child. It is vital that you have life insurance on your children. Guess what? The state there is a cap on the maximum amount of life insurance that you can get for a child. So don't feel like somebody's going to think you're trying to rub your child out. It ain't enough money. Trust me, it's not enough money to get rid of your child for. But in all seriousness, though, because I've seen lots of children at very young ages. Think about, you see things like dog attacks. You see things like children that have, as a matter of fact, I know someone that whose child passed away at 5 years old from an appendicitis that ruptured. So it is vital that you think about these things. Grandparents, if your children do not have insurance on their children, get it as a grandparent. This is very vital. There is so much that is happening these days. And I think sometimes there's a mindset that people think, well, if I get insurance, something is going to happen. Forget about it. The only thing that is inevitable is death. And we don't know when it's going to happen, guys. So make sure that you have insurance on yourself. Make sure that you have insurance for your spouse, and make sure that you have insurance for your minor children. Very important. And so again, thank you guys so much for joining me today for Power of Attorney. Until next time, have a great day.